Welcome, everybody, to the Nuggets of Gold podcast and YouTube channel. Today, we're trying to find a topic, and we basically decided, you know what, why not talk about other teams outside the 49ers? So today, we're going to be talking about the biggest threats in the NFC, and we're going to go through just the NFC first, talk about them a little bit, and then we're just going to exclusively talk about the NFC West and go through the Seahawks, Cardinals, and Rams. But let's get started with these NFC teams. I think we probably both have one team at the top. For me, it's the Buccaneers, and I'm just expecting that you're the same way, Aiden, right now. You just look at this team; they're bringing back almost everyone. Wide receiver core is really, really good. The defense, I'm looking. I was just going through the depth chart before we recorded, and it's like, okay, they have really capable players on every level of the field, and they have guys that were standout players last year at each part of the field as well. I mean, they got two linebackers in Levante David and Devin White. Levante David's been one of the most underrated defensive players in the league for his whole career, pretty much. Winfield last year had an excellent season. Same with Carlton Davis, who wasn't like a great player early on in his career. He had a resurgence. Then you look at the defensive line. You got JPP. We know how good he's been in the past. He's not, and the best thing is he's not even their best guy. Their best guy is Shaq Barrett, who for the last 3 years, even when he was on the Broncos too, has been an extraordinary player. So this is a team that I think their defense gets really underrated, but you pair this defense with an offense that has Tom Brady, multiple running backs they can give the ball to, a really, really good offensive line, and then their wide receivers are Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, AB, and Gronk. Not to mention they're getting OJ Howard back. It's just crazy. So Buccaneers, I think the Buccaneers are the top dogs in the NFC. And Aiden, are you feeling the same way about this team?
I would feel the same way. I think that there's a lot of things to consider. I think that they're probably a little bit overrated now. Everyone is looking at them like they're these world beaters. But I think that we forget if there's no Jared Cook fumble in that first Saints playoff game, say the Packers go for it instead of kicking the 3 points, or the Bucs don't score right at the end of the half because Kevin King doesn't know how to play football, that game could look completely different. So I think there is a little bit of recency bias in how good they looked against the Chiefs, but also a positive for them is they get a full offseason. That's something that they didn't get last year, and they were still able to win the title. So a lot of factors to consider for them. Brady is 45, but the man I don't even know how he's doing it, but he just does not age. So I think that they're the cream of the crop in the NFC section so far, and similar to the Lakers before, you count them out, you got to beat them, and no one's been able to do that quite yet.
And we were talking about a little bit too, just how their final record was 11-5, 12-4, not crazy dominant or anything, but you brought up one of the big kind of issues with saying that, and I think that looking at them and just looking at their overall record is one thing, but you brought up the offseason. They didn't have that last year. They're bringing in a new quarterback, changing their scheme up a little bit from from a guy like Jameis Winston, Tom Brady, in very, very different players, very, very different skill sets. So I think that's going to be something that you have to kind of look at, hey, how long did it take these guys to adjust? And it took them a little bit, but once they got rolling, they were really, really good. And I think that's why everyone, has them as a hot team coming into this year, and being the defending Super Bowl champs always helps as well. So that's about it for them. So let's get into the Packers a little bit. I think the Packers, the big looming question is whether or not Aaron Rodgers is going to play. And I think if you don't have Aaron Rodgers, you can take them out of this conversation. And I'm also someone that believes a lot in Jordan Love, but I just don't think he's going to be, ready to replicate what Aaron Rodgers has done for them. Also, he's not going to be able to mask some of the flaws that the Packers have had, because Aaron Rodgers even hasn't been able to do that in the past. I mean, they've won. Everyone knows they've won one Super Bowl in his career, but just looking back at the last few years, they can't win, and it's not his fault. It's the defensive side of the ball. It's guys like Kevin King, and it's guys, either in the secondary just getting torched like he did in that last playoff game, and then you go back to 2019 when they lost to the Niners. They couldn't stop their run game at all. And you kind of look at these linebackers, it's Preston Smith, Kamal Martin, and Chris Barnes. I don't think that's really helping you a ton against the Niners. I think that this is a team that really suffocates you. So for me, you got to bring up the Packers in this discussion because they've been in the NFC Championship the last 2 years. They potentially have Aaron Rodgers, but I think that's the big thing. Because for me, if they have Aaron, yes, they're absolutely a threat. They're going to be a really good team in the NFC. But if they don't, well, then I think you can kind of take them out of this discussion. I think you're going to see a massive step back if they don't have him next year.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. They've made the last two NFC title games, but I feel like everybody would agree that they're a tier below the Bucks, and I would say a tier below the Niners even. But I don't think Aaron not playing takes them out of like the playoff picture. It's a weak division. The Bears don't really know what that offense is going to look like. The Lions are going to be awful, and I don't trust Kirk Cousins to win more than 7-8 games. So if Love comes out and wins 9-10 games just off the running game, and I mean, I think not having Rodgers cripples their chances at a title, but I think that they're going to be in that fourth, fifth tier of teams that we're going to talk about a little bit later. But if Rodgers doesn't play, I could still see them make the playoffs. But like you said, I don't think that they're going to be making any waves in the playoffs. And I think that the NFC Championship streak ends it too for them.
Yeah, I definitely think that as well. And with Aaron, like without Aaron, they could definitely make the playoffs. But in terms of like, do I think if they met the Niners in the playoffs without Aaron, I think that that's just a bad matchup for the Packers. That's the way I see it. They could definitely knock off a team or two. Like, don't get me wrong. They still have a lot of good players on that team. You got Devontae Adams, that's going to help your quarterback a lot. An easy guy to just run that quick out when you're on the strong side of the field. So definitely think they could be an okay enough team, but I don't think they're that top end team that we've seen in the past couple of years. And even that team hasn't been able to really get over the hump. So, but moving on from them, I want to talk about the Saints a little bit, have them kind of in this discussion of these top NFC teams, and kind of makes you look back and look at the NFC and go, this isn't the strongest conference in the league. The AFC is a lot better. A lot of just, in my opinion, at least, I think you have a couple really good teams in the NFC. But after you kind of start looking at it, you go, well, the Saints, they got their playmakers. Their defense will probably take a step back, just, losing a lot of depth, not a lot, but a little bit of depth this offseason. No Drew Brees, but then you have to kind of question, well, that hasn't really hurt them in the past couple of years, like missing Drew Brees. We know that Teddy did great when he was in there. When they missed out on Drew Brees earlier this year, it didn't really hurt their offense as bad. I mean, I would even argue that when he came back, he wasn't fully healthy, and I think that hurt them most in the end. And I think that was a lot of the reason why they weren't able to beat the Buccaneers team that we were talking about earlier. But I'm for some reason, I feel like they're going to take a step back. But when you kind of look at it just from afar and you go, okay, like you look at the roster, you go, okay, they have a good offensive line. They got Michael Thomas, who I think is going to have a much better season. Alvin Kamara, they have Jameis Winston, but the guy who's calling plays is Sean Payton, and he's one of the best in the business. So like, it's tough to look at them from an offensive perspective and think that they're not going to produce. And then on defense, they got playmakers. They got Cam Jordan. They got Demario Davis, who's been pretty good the last couple of years. And then it kind of goes away. You got Marshawn Lattimore. He's been kind of a little bit streaky. Malcolm Jenkins, Marcus Williams at safety. Like it's not anything amazing, but I still expect them to be in like every ball game. And I think that's just one of those things like for 49er fans, you talk about having a guy like Kyle Shanahan that can like mask some of your roster's flaws. Same thing with Sean Payton, in my opinion. So I think this is going to be a better team than I'm kind of expecting, because for some reason, I like just looking at them, I was thinking that they're going to have a big step back, but I don't really know if they should, if that makes sense. So I don't know. Where are you at on that, Maiden?
I'm kind of with you. I don't really know what to expect. It sucks that they're in a really tough division. I think Winston is going to struggle against that Bucks defense twice a year. I think that's a bad matchup for him and really any quarterback. Panthers are getting better, and I expect the Falcons to be better than they were last year. I really like Arthur Smith, and I think Matt Ryan has become criminally underrated after not an awesome season last year, but he's less than 5 years away from an MVP season, which is something to keep in mind. Obviously, he had Kyle then, who we know can make Nick Mullins into a serviceable quarterback for most of his career. But the Saints, it's going to be interesting. They're going to go as far as Jameis can really take them. I don't think we're going to see a 30-30 season out of Jameis again. But if he's able to go 30-15, this is a team who could make the playoffs. And again, I don't expect them to compete for a title, but the fact that they were able to reload losing Breeze and having literally no money, kudos to that front office for even having us talk about them as one of these top teams. Because I think we had somebody on months ago and they were like, what are the Saints going to do? But I think that they made it work, and it'll be really interesting to see how they end up playing.
Yeah, so are those three teams your top three teams in the NFC? Like, just who can be the most competitive outside of the NFC West, though, not counting them? Are those your three top teams?
I'll put the Saints lower, and I like I'm higher on the Bears than a lot of other people. I think that defense is going to be really, really good, and whoever they start at quarterback, I think Dalton is serviceable. And I mean, they made the playoffs last year with the MVP. So again, and say the Packers don't have Aaron Rodgers, they're the team to beat in that division. Probably they have a lot of question marks.
I don't know
But
about that one. I don't know about them being the team to beat in that division. I think
the
it's someone
Vikings,
else.
is it the Vikings?
That's what I think. I think the Vikings are going to be a lot better this year. Yes, they have Kirk Cousins, and I know everyone hates Kirk Cousins. It's disgusting. Oh, everyone freaks out. But their defense is going to have 10 new starters from what they had in week 17. I think that just shows how injured they were. If the 49ers were the most injured team in the NFL last year, the Vikings were probably the second most injured. So you got to bring that up because they were a team that was consistently in that playoff hunt. I think that they should win double-digit games, even if Aaron Rodgers is playing. I think they're just a team that you look at their offense. Their offense, yes, they have Kirk, but you have Dalvin Cook, Adam Thielen, and Justin Jefferson, and they complete like their whole draft was pretty much addressing the offensive line. Like that was what they did at the beginning of the draft. So a lot of times it takes a little while to actually improve that offensive line after you get those young pieces in, but in my opinion, is a huge step in the right direction for them because that's been somewhere that they have just not, that's something, an area that they've just not addressed in the past. And then, their defense has been pretty good under Zimmer. And it's had some years where it's been really good. So if they could do that, if, they got some young corners and they brought in Patrick Peterson, Pat Pete can be somewhat of his old self. I think that you might look at them as the division winner. But I like that you bring up the Bears as well. I think that they're another team that people are going to look at them and go, because they are going to start Andy Dalton. Unfortunately, I am fully for starting Justin Fields week 1 for the Bears. They're going to start Andy Dalton. Now, people are going to be really upset. I'm going to be really upset. But Andy Dalton is better than I think everyone kind of markets him to be. He's a solid player. He's a solid quarterback. You know what you're going to get. Last year in Dallas, he was actually doing all right. He was running the offense decent enough. Problem in Dallas, and we can bring that up right now as well. Their defense is all over the place, and I don't think you should expect a ton out of that side of the ball. But I think Andy Dalton can do good things with the Bears. But for me, it's just I don't trust Matt Nagy. That's gonna be my issue. I think he might be. I think he could easily be the first guy to get fired, and then your coaching staff is in flux. So I don't really love them, and that's why I probably put the Vikings ahead of them. But I definitely think that both those teams are worth bringing up.
Yeah, I think that that's completely fair. I kind of took biggest threat as different than better team. Say the Bears are able to get it going with Fields. I'm definitely more threatened by a team with Fields and a really good defense than a team with Kirk. And even if he has better weapons, just in terms of who could catch fire and who I wouldn't want to see in the playoffs, I'm still going to take the Bears over the Vikings, even though I 100% agree. I think the Vikings should and potentially will win double-digit games and going to really compete with the Packers, especially if Aaron doesn't play. But I think that's a really good point.
That's the one thing. It's kind of hard to go through this NFC with a big looming question of, is Aaron Rodgers going to be playing in the NFL next year? So that's something that's pretty tough. One other team that I'll bring up, and then we'll get into the NFC West teams, are the Panthers. I am a big advocate of putting all your stock into the Panthers right now. Huge Christian McCaffrey fan. I think that he's one of the few running backs in the game that really, really changes the game. Because we see that with Derrick Henry. I think the other guy we see that with is Christian McCaffrey. a lot of other great running backs, not trying to, say they're not special. But I think those two guys are much more special than everyone else in the league. Then you look at the rest of that offense. They got a guy in DJ Moore, and they did lose Curtis Samuel. They drafted Tommy Trimble. They have Robbie Anderson. They got a lot of weapons. The big move they made was they moved on from Teddy Bridgewater, brought in Sam Darnold. He's going to be the starter. Another guy that I am high on in the right situation, and we've talked about it before on here, Aiden, and I know that we've talked about it on the actual pod. Even though it's a Niners pod, I've talked about Matt Rule and Joe Brady just being a great fit for a lot of young rookie quarterbacks. Well, I think Darnold's kind of in that conversation of like a guy that needs to be molded. So for them, I think they're really dangerous. I think they're a year away, but I think they're way too overlooked as an organization and as a team that can really be a top-end NFC team, in my opinion, a year from now. So not this 2021 season, but I think 2022, I think you're going to see them be just really, like, maybe not take over, but I think you'll see them looking like they did under Ron Rivera. I think it's going to be that kind of level of a team. So another team I'm super high on. But anyone else that you're high on? And also, what are your thoughts on the Panthers?
For those of you that don't know, I'm from North Carolina. I'm in NC right now. So I know that I do hear a lot of Panthers things. I think that they'll be good, especially next year. I don't really know how to feel about Darnold quite yet, but they're probably going to let Robbie Anderson walk at the end of this year. But they got Terrace Marshall, which I think was a huge pick for them. But this is a team that passed on Fields. I was sitting in a room with a bunch of Panthers fans who were like, "We're really going to get Fields," and then they passed on him. So I mean, I think that shows what they like about Darnold. But a team that we haven't talked about that I expect to win the division is Washington. They got a really good defensive line. Obviously, question marks at the quarterback position, but Rivera, who you talked about, has a way of milking talent out of that position. Guys that, he had Kyle Allen at 4-0 before Nick Bosa walked in the stadium. But I expect Washington to win that division. That defense is too strong, and quarterback will be better than it was last year. But that isn't saying a whole lot. But I think that they're in that bottom-ish tier, like we were talking about before. Those teams like the Vikings and the Bears, who don't really scare me because they don't have that upper tier quarterback talent. But that defensive line is really, really good. And all super young, and they're built like the 49ers were in like 2019 in terms of the defensive side. I think they got 5-6 first rounders. So that's definitely a team to at least talk about.
100%. I don't know how I didn't bring up the Washington football team. They were the team I bet on to make the playoffs, like be that worst to first team last year, which they were. I'm super high on them. Also, think they're more of like one of those teams where it's like they're going to make the playoffs. I fully expect them to make the playoffs, but they're also not quite there yet. Main issue is being quarterback. They do have Mr. Taylor Heineke, which is exciting. Ryan Fitzpatrick. They definitely got some polarizing, options that people, just love to watch. Great watches at quarterback. Don't know if it's going to produce to wins though, and a productive offense. So that's going to be the big question there. But love that you bring up the Washington football team.